Hello, my name is Gaetan Pelletier. I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Hardwoods Research Institute. This three-part video series is inspired by a presentation that we made at the Forest and Bees Industry Forum in Fredericton on March 16th, 2023. It is undeniable that our hardwood resource in New Brunswick is challenged. It doesn't matter if hardwoods are on crown lands or large industrial freehold or small woodlots. There are several challenges that we need to face. Our first challenge is that the species composition of the mature tree layer is changing for the worse. So these are the commercial size trees greater than 10 centimeters at DBH. We've looked at two successive forest inventory cycles in New Brunswick of recent, and we've tracked the change in that layer. What we've noticed is that sugar maple has been declining in proportions by approximately 20%. Red maple, on the other hand, has increased its proportion by about 60%. American beech has been declining a little bit. There's an overall reduction in growing stock of hardwoods, and there's an overall reduction of trees large enough to carry saw logs. Using the same data, we've noticed also that many treated areas in the past fail to meet regeneration expectations. Again, when we compare two different vintages of inventories over the last 10 years, we've noticed that sugar maple regeneration has declined, red maple regeneration has increased, beech regeneration has increased substantially, so has the non-commercial strata. The good news is yellow birch has also increased in proportion. These changes in inventory, both at the mature tree level and also at the regeneration level, eventually materialize into changes in growing stock, but also the annual allowable cut that depends on it. So overall, if we look at crown lands, and this is an old analysis from a previous management plan, the new plan is not out yet. What we're noticing is that overall tolerant hardwoods have declined. The proportion of sugar maple has also declined, and the proportion of large trees that carry saw logs has also declined. All of these affect the annual allowable cut. The fourth challenge that we are facing relates to the way we manage the forest. Overall, it is our impression that the hardwood strategy that is adopted in New Brunswick lacks the sophistication that's required to address all the gaps that we mentioned earlier. Overall, we feel that the strategy currently used is borrowed from softwood management. Harvest-based silviculture is not understood at the level that it should be if we're serious about managing hardwoods. And also, we're missing some mechanisms that are required under a results-based regime to monitor, adjust, correct course for attaining those desired outcomes. Finally, we noticed that attaining the basic outcomes or the basic objectives that we've set forward for the hardwood resource are still not met. Here we see the pyramid of basic priorities for silviculture of hardwoods, and then looking at the base, regenerating desired species and also reducing the risk of losing value for the crop trees that we leave and maintain is barely met currently. If we go further up the priorities, improving growth on crop trees and then improving the quality of those crop trees, There's still substantial challenges there. So we still have big gaps in the way we're managing our hardwood resource under the current context. So we now understand the gaps and the challenges around our hardwood resource. So let us look at where we want to go from here. What type of results do we want to get? So we are introducing different concepts that are useful when we're considering managing our hardwood resource differently. The first one is with regards to the hierarchy of forest management planning scales, and we believe that it should be reversed. The status quo we're adopting today at the strategic scale, the annual allowable cut of hardwoods is constrained mostly by fallout from softwood operations. We're assuming that time has little impact on tree quality and health. At the operational scale, the harvest is very often regulated just by a sheer total of all hardwood products coming from all zones. Treatments are very vague, and then the stratification is rather coarse, and it comes from the forest management plans. So in what we call the new paradigm, then we're suggesting that we're driven by restoration and also not losing value and sawlog content from our hardwood trees, stands, and forest. So we're advocating targeting trees of poor health that have saw logs, harvesting them first before they lose their saw logs, harvesting low vigor trees first, reducing competition around crop trees that we want to leave in partial harvests, recruit new cohorts of desired species, and of course, pay a lot more attention on stratification. And then we're advocating applying custom treatments to smaller block sections and promote better utilization in forest. So from there and only at that point, we recommend formulating a strategy, and we are suggesting very strongly that we start creating some zones in Crown Lands licenses, for example, in large industrial freehold, where we recognize the potential to grow quality hardwoods. In those zones, we recommend the annual level cut be calculated separately, and then volumes from harvests are regulated appropriately, and then we implement state-of-the-art harvest-based silviculture. So this zone of high-quality hardwood potential that we are advocating or talking about, we're working with Dr. Paul Arp at UNB and one of his graduate students, Elizabeth White, to develop a methodology to identify those areas. So that forest managers would not be left struggling to try to identify those zones within which we implement this new regime that we are suggesting. The strategic forest management plan in those zones should be prepared differently than the way it is today, and we strongly recommend to formulate objectives that are very specific, that are measurable, achievable, realistic, and also bound in time. By example, one of those objectives in a special high potential hardwood zone could be by the year 2042 in the working forest, the growing stock of sugar maple will have grown by 15% from its 2012 level, increased its acceptable growing stock ratio by 10 percentage points, increase its piece size by 10%, stalking and saplings will have increased by 25% in young and immature stands, and stalking in saplings will have increased by 10% overall in late successional stands from the baseline of 2012. A second concept that is important to understand is that species, tree size, and form have a direct impact on value of a stand and also its growth. And what we have noticed, and which has been corroborated from other jurisdictions as well and well validated, is that saw log production on a particular tree hits a maximum at a certain diameter breast height, and usually for sugar maple and yellow birch, it is around 45 centimeters. Beyond that point, discoloration and rot start to set in, and we're gradually losing the potential for saw log material. So the second concept, we recommend to harvest trees that have hit that economic or financial maturity before they deteriorate further and start losing saw logs and then dramatically reduce in value. Unfortunately, this is counterintuitive for harvester operators, where human nature will make them harvest a smaller tree that is easier to process rather than go after a big wolf tree that is difficult to process. Our third concept is that competition greatly impacts stand and tree growth. This again has been demonstrated by Northern Hardwoods Research Institute, but it's very common in the range of tolerant hardwoods in North America. So in essence, single tree growth is largely dependent on its diameter, and it is moderated by the growing space around it. In partial harvest, release is more effective on small, medium-sized trees than it is on larger trees, which reduce growth. So the recommendation is to maintain an ideal diameter distribution throughout the stand by doing multiple entries where we will practice moderate to high removals. So this will encourage growth, more growth on trees that has the highest potential. Another concept is that interactions between species, tree size, and growing space impact individual tree growth rate. In this example here, we have a pattern of individual tree growth rate impacted by the tree's DBH. As mentioned before, as a tree gets past a certain size, its growth rate will diminish. So this is the pattern for a tree within a very tight environment of 30 square meters per hectare. This pattern is for a tree of different diameters under an environment that is not so crowded, so 15 square meters per hectare. And finally, this is a pattern for sugar maple growth rate by diameter when they are open growth. The same patterns exist in the same ranking for yellow birch, but yellow birch always has higher growth rate than sugar maple. So the take-home message here is that single tree growth is dependent on DBH and species. Growing space moderates growth further. Release of a tree will give better results, better growth rates on small and medium-sized trees. And the target is to maintain an ideal diameter distribution for the stand through multiple entries. Again, trying to harvest trees of larger size which don't have the same growth rate. Also, growth rate is impacted by a tree's vigor. This example, again, sugar maple of good health, pattern across different diameters, When health is just average, the growth rates across all diameter ranges are less. And finally, sugar maple of low growth rate will grow a lot less than any other situation. For yellow birch, the patterns are exactly the same. Again, yellow birch has a higher growth rate than sugar maple. So with this concept, it is recommended that we maintain an ideal diameter distribution through multiple entries and to always harvest trees with less vigor that are more at risk because they don't have quite a high growth rate as trees that are vigorous. So far, we've seen that growth rate is impacted by species. It is impacted by diameter of the tree, also its health status, its vigor, and competition around that tree. So a silviculturist can manipulate those parameters and make sure stands are obtaining ideal growth rate throughout their life cycle. Now we're looking at recruiting regeneration. So for tolerant hardwood stands that do contain American beech, we see a pattern based on the intensity of the harvesting. Beech will regenerate well at low harvest intensities. If we open up, beech regeneration will not do as well. Sugar maple has kind of a paraboloid response where at low removals, sugar maple will not regenerate very well and generate saplings. But at medium intensities, sugar maple will actually regenerate better than most other species. Yellow birch has a very specific pattern. If you want to recruit yellow birch and obtain saplings in your stand, you need to create big openings, so high harvesting intensities. And red maple does not seem to have a particular pattern. It does equally well under different types of harvesting intensity. So if we're practicing even age management, even age silviculture, where we do remove a very high proportion of the stand, so very high harvest intensities, we will promote yellow birch. We'll do okay with sugar maple, discourage American beech, and red maple is relatively not impacted. On the other end of a scale, if we practice uneven age silviculture, where we do have smaller harvesting intensity, then we will promote beech. It's going to be a little bit good for sugar maple, but even better for beech, and yellow birch, of course, will not do well. But the interesting silviculture, which is fairly new in North America, if we practice medium removal intensities, so between 40 and 80% removals, it's considered to be irregular silviculture, two-age extensive, irregular shelter wood. In that window, that's where we have the best opportunities to stimulate sugar maple regeneration, still encourage yellow birch, but discourage regeneration of American beech. So if we are interested at minimizing beech, we have to practice silviculture that creates enough openings to encourage sugar maple and yellow birch and discourage beech. The last concept is with regards to how even is the distribution of trees after treatment. And what we know is that at some point, if the crop trees that are left are too much in clumps and their crowns are not evenly released, the impact of the treatment is kind of canceled. And at some point, if we have a very, very patchy treatment, the effect is negligible and not better than doing nothing. So it is highly recommended that when we practice partial harvesting as part of a silviculture regime, that we try to release trees evenly and avoid patchiness and leaving clumps of trees. In this final video, we will see how we can put those concepts into practice so we can come up with solutions to change the situation with hardwoods in our province. At the end of the day, we need to practice restoration silviculture in much of the hardwood forests of New Brunswick. And the overarching goal is really to restore compromised stands through harvest-based silviculture with the goal to recruit new cohort of desired species and then to maintain and release the existing acceptable growing stock. Depending on stand type that we are dealing with, usually we need to open up the stand more than we would usually and maintain, however, a minimum basal area. So while we're creating openings, we recover trees that carry saw logs in them today, but are of low vigor and at risk of losing saw logs and value. At the same time, we are releasing small trees, pole-sized trees, and medium trees of acceptable growing stock. We're also creating germination beds so that seeds can find the right substrate, germinate, and form the next cohort of trees. So once this regeneration is in place and has had time to grow and developed into a nice sapling strata, then we can conduct intermediate treatments so that we can release those saplings and control competition. These treatments typically would be pre-commercial thinning, and if we delay long enough, can be commercial thinnings. So when we do this, very often we have the ability to create the conditions so that a new cohort can get established. And then we're now starting to develop multiple ages in our once degraded stand. So through successive treatments in time, we will conduct partial harvesting, we will release crop trees of quality, cut large trees that are no longer producing saw logs and are at risk of losing value. And we keep doing this on cycles, and now we're on a pathway to a better forest. So this regime is called the irregular silviculture system, which is a process of regeneration. It consists of successive partial cuts that are used to establish regeneration. And then we maintain protective cover. The treatments are spread over a longer period that don't exceed usually 1/5 of the rotation. So the steps are do the seed establishment cut, which are followed by one or several secondary cuts, and then the final harvesting can be spread at different parts of the stands at different time. When we surveyed about 5,000 hectares of hardwood stands in New Brunswick, we found that this is the system that was recommended very, very often. There are several variants of this irregular shelterwood system, and one of the most common is what we call at the Northern Hardwoods Research Institute the continuous cover 2H extensive system. We have gone through great lengths to really document those silviculture regimes and those systems, and everyone has a section about which stands are eligible to receive those treatments. We describe treatment objectives, describe the treatment. But a very important part is we detail what are the desired outcomes immediately after the treatment is conducted, in the midterm and in the long term, and we always introduce the key success factors that are required to properly implement. But the most important part is how to implement these treatments. So we talk about the sequence. How do you conduct actions so the treatment is done well. So we talk about what harvesting system to use, the harvesting season that is preferred. But then we say look at the trail network. We have recommendations. Once that trail network is well done, you focus on the treatment strip between harvester trails, and then we look at what is the residual density that we should be leaving in terms of basal area, what are the cut priorities, and then the cutting instructions by size and size of trees and then species. So we really encourage you to go and investigate all this silviculture, and our website will give you all kinds of documentation and tools, and there's even a phone app you can use to do an assessment of your stand, a diagnostic, and then there's a recommended treatment, and you can get instructions how to implement it. In essence, what we're saying is it is really imperative that we change the way we're planning our hardwood management and deviate from the softwood model and embrace a framework that we've introduced through this series of videos and the presentation made at Forest NB in Industries Forum in Fredericton. And hopefully implementing the regime that we are proposing should close the gaps that we've discussed in this series, namely that our mature tree layer is changing for the worse in terms of species composition. The second issue is that our regeneration is failing. We're not able to establish the cohorts of trees that we need for the future. The third challenge is that our annual level cut is going down because we're not sustaining the growth rates that we could be if we implemented the proper silviculture. And then finally, there's much thinking to be done about the way we're planning our activities. So this brings an end to this series of 3 videos, and as usual, we really invite you to check our website, and all the information we talked about today is out there and in much more detail and right down to a prescribed system. Thank you for listening to us, and good luck.